Nothing's perfect. It's a doctrine by which we live all day, every day. Many of us still wish it were perfect. If only I had that, if only I were that, if only I could do that. But in placing so much energy and desire in the ego, we are inadvertently disturbing our balance of yin and yang, to dangerous effect. I'm Guy Kiddie, and it's time to get philosophical. Take a few deep breaths, cross your legs and hum if necessary, and prepare for a quick tour through China's 3 teachings. Like so much of ancient history, it's difficult to talk about the precise origins of China's 3 main faiths, and even more difficult to talk with clarity about their subsequent practice. What we can say, however, is that Confucianism, Taoism and Buddhism became a triumvirate in Bronze Age China and have been the backbone of Chinese culture and society since records began. The term 3 teachings has different interpretations, but in general describes an amalgam of the premises and spiritual practices of China's 3 core faiths. Over time, different dynasties favoured different faiths. It was sometimes a matter of fashion, and often a reaction against the preceding dynasty's religious preferences. Sometimes politics were involved. The Tang dynasty, for instance, started off in great favour of Buddhism. Ultimately, Buddhists were persecuted and their monasteries sacked for their riches as Confucian fervour attempted to repair a ruined country. It was during the Ming dynasty, which represents China's longest continuous period of dynastic rule, that the 3 teachings really became one under the guise of Neo-Confucianism. But why the need to combine faiths? Critics throughout the ages have said that the problem with any one of Confucianism, Taoism and Buddhism is that they each focus too strongly on certain elements of life and existence, and therefore leave too many questions unanswered. Confucianism is ostensibly a selfless teaching, where harmony between people along the lines of a strict family hierarchy is the way to prosperity. The relations between people are not to be enforced by law, but rather set by example, and accepted as necessary for the maintenance of social cohesion. This view of society is very much representative of Bronze Age China, which is when Confucius is thought to have lived and taught. But the rigidity of this approach to life did not work in reality. Whatever Confucius might have said, people resented ceding power and influence to so-called superiors who, in turn, started introducing laws and cracking down on dissenters. The clearest evidence of this is the Warring States period that marked the end of the Zhao dynasty. Vassal states rebelled against an increasingly weakened Zhao dynasty that had, they thought, spent too long throwing its weight around. In stark contrast to this instruction on social hierarchy came Taoism. Lao Tzu, believed to be a contemporary of Confucius, is credited with founding and first codifying Taoism in a book called Tao Te Ching. The faith is based around the concept of the Tao, the way, and not just any old way, but your own way. Unlike Confucianism, Taoism emphasizes the individual. It is in fact like a very early version of the Romanticism that swept the Western world in the 19th century. That too was a movement that advocated a reassertion of the self, but it also placed huge importance on the simplicity of the natural world. Taoism focuses in on this simplicity, perhaps as an antidote to the perceived complexity of Confucius's notions of hierarchy, but also perhaps in an early example of anti-establishmentarianism. The Taoists were anarchists, who renounced the rules of government and society. Buddhism stepped in to fill another existential gap. Confucianism had provided pointers on social cohesion and moral integrity. Taoism had focused more on the happiness to be found in simplicity, naturalness and individuality. But none had really addressed the human condition, the inevitability of suffering. Siddhartha Gautama was an unhappy man. He first went to traditional teachers in search of solace, but found no relief. Then he tried extreme asceticism, practically starving himself to death. Thankfully, a young girl brought him some milk one day, and it turned out to be a revelation. He established a core Buddhist tenet, the so-called middle way between self-indulgence and self-mortification. But while he taught that suffering was inevitable, just one of those things, he also reminded that life is in a constant state of flux. There are few things you can guarantee. You're born, your mother loves you, you pay taxes, and you can always count on change. You could say, in fact, that Buddhism established the truism that life's neither black nor white. It's shades of grey. Neo-Confucianism in the Ming dynasty was a combination of many of the core tenets of the donor religions. The first major advocate of the system was Zhao Dunyi, an 11th century philosopher. His teachings could be called a Confucian Reformation, rather like the Protestant Reformation that swept Western Europe in the 16th century. Martin Luther rehashed Christianity, incorporating humanist thought and the inspiration of the Renaissance. So too in China did philosophers like Dunyi adopt many Buddhist and Taoist concepts and realign classical Confucian theory to provide a new rational system of ethics to deal with a rapidly changing society heading towards industrialization. This rationalist approach was in contrast to the spiritualism that underpinned Buddhist and Taoist metaphysics, or in other words, the nature of being. It's all about the yin and the yang, positive and negative energy. They're in a state of dynamic equilibrium. When one energy level rises, the other falls. Confucius says you should achieve the right balance by knowing your place and staying there. Lao Tzu says you need to accept things the way they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Siddhartha suggests you just try your best, accept there's suffering you can't avoid, but that what most aggravates is self-indulgence. If you go about life with the right frame of mind and the right intentions towards others, and realistic expectations of the self, you're more likely to be happy. Taoism too is founded on the idea of moderation. One oft-quoted line from the Tao Te Ching is, "The truth is not always beautiful, nor beautiful words the truth." It just goes to show that the three teachings are largely interdependent. Each faith has taken various aspects of the others and garnished it to fit into its own specific view of life and the world. Even though we can talk of a definitive period of three teachings during the Ming Dynasty, each of the faiths has evolved over the ages as theologians and philosophers have refined their own specific doctrines. The debates that led to the formation of New Confucianism have found similar expression in the Western world. The major difference is that modern liberal democracies draw on secular political thought that is completely rationalist. It is this post-Enlightenment approach to metaphysics that still separates East from West and accepts any creed under the auspices of a free state. China's three faiths have borrowed extensively from each other, even though Taoism was in many ways a reaction to the strictures of Confucianism. Buddhism was a fresh perspective and a faith that started with philosophy before finding justification for its premises in the real world. Though the East certainly had religious reformations, it never had a secular enlightenment, and many commentators cite this as a main reason for the doctrinaire polity that still controls China and many other countries in Asia. Secular rule did not happen without struggle and strife. Radically different ideas take a long time to catch on, then they reach a tipping point. Think of Charles Darwin, for example. His theory of evolution, which we covered as part of our series on the Industrial Revolution, is still hotly debated even today. You can check out this video by clicking here. What do you think? Can countries accommodate many different religions without a secular philosophical revolution? Should religion and state be separate? And to what extent do you have control over your yin and yang? Let us know your answers to these questions, and do leave any other comments on the subject in the section below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to ensure you receive all our videos on China and the other historical topics that take our fancy. My name's Guy, thanks for popping by. See you next time.